forward. Let's just do this. So the size of the industry, in case you didn't know, it's the biggest consumer electronics industry on the planet. 8.8 billion customers use mobile at the end of 2025. All the slides I'm using today are available through Esteban. If you need copies of the slides afterwards, but feel free to take pictures or notes as you wish. The 8.8 billion is sometimes confusing because that actually means it's more subscriptions than people on the planet. In truth, many people have more than one subscription. So we then look at unique subscribers, and the unique subscribers is 5.8 billion at the end of last year. So not everybody has a phone yet, but some have more than one. Some may have a work phone and a personal phone. Some may even have a car phone. I even known people who've had 8 or 9 subscriptions before now. You may well wonder why, but they do. So the unique number is the key number. But we've actually had more mobile phones than toothbrushes, or mobile phones than toilets, more mobile phones than anything else really you can try and compare it against in consumer electronics. This industry supports around 50 million jobs. That's huge. It's not just in the networks, it's also in the supply chain, it's also in the devices that we use. I'm sure all of you have smartphones, but the smartphones often power apps, and that they would be included if on a smartphone as well. Around 800 billion in public revenues still can be accounted for. The industry itself is about $1.3 trillion a year. The number of mobile smartphones shipped every year is about 1.5 billion every year. So this is still a growth industry, even if it's not as fast a rate of growth as it used to be. It's also changed its shape radically since I got involved in the industry in 1987. I did 30 years in mobile to 2017 before I became chief scientist. Globally, these figures come from the GSM Association. So some of the references in these slides give you some further reference and detail if you need it in terms of reference sources. They're useful references when it comes to dissertations or a project or a thesis, and quite useful references in terms of evidence. But when we look at what the value is in terms of its impact on society, it's typically amounting to $11.3 trillion, which is huge. It's a big sector, which is typically 6, maybe 7% of any economy around the world. So it is touching every way of life. When it started, it was very much a voice world back in the 1980s. And then we added in messaging, so things like SMS, and later mobile internet, and then mobile email type services. But we're actually moving much more beyond connectivity to a much wider range of services. And that means that issues to do with cybersecurity have become a lot more important. If you think about e-commerce, for example, a lot of buying and selling is now done through a mobile phone. So we have to watch the cybersecurity side of that, as well as the fraud risks in that sort of area. We also have to look when thinking about transport, your ability to swipe and pay for your travel on the underground has some significant security options to make sure that there's no fraud that intervenes in that sort of area. So it's touching all avenues of society. There are some gaps still to be filled, but cybersecurity is becoming ever more important. If we look at the shape of the industry itself, we typically say, let's measure the landmass where cell sites are. And we typically say globally, it's about 58% is covered globally. There is a usage gap where some people have coverage, but don't use the services available. So that might be because of income, that might be because of literacy, that might be because of other barriers. For example, in AI, we're already looking at how can we introduce new languages, not LLMs, but new spoken languages to the world of AI. The GSM Association, who produced these figures, have a project with SOAS, it's SOAS, part of University of London, looking at African languages, because there are around 150 West African languages that are currently excluded from typical smartphones or typical AI-type capability. So thinking about how to make this inclusive is quite an important thing. So we have to think about the usage gap, which is big, but we also have to think about the coverage gap. Now, the coverage gap, the way GSMA defined it, is the land. So if you take a different definition of the planet and the sea and the mountains, you actually get a much bigger coverage gap than 4%. We all know that there are gaps in mobile coverage, but typically that they may be caused by congestion on the network or genuinely no coverage. So this definition is very much where the networks are built as opposed to over the sea in remote areas. When we look at 5G, the latest generation, it's not yet in the lead. Most of the mobile leadership is still on 4G. If we look at the gross numbers of 8.8 billion subscriptions, most of it is on 4G today. This chart shows that by 2030, 57% will be on 5G. That's the 5th generation of mobile, higher speed, higher capacity, more cybersecurity. So I'm going to mainly concentrate on 5G today, but we need to recognize that not all countries or regions are the same. So we can see by 2025, certainly the GCC states will work very advanced, and they may be as high as 95% 5G by 2030, because they've got a head start. But we can see in places like developed Asia Pacific, separated from China here, already a very high percentage of 5G and expected to get to 91%. Here in Europe, we've not had the same fast start with 5G that other parts of the world have had. That's partly because of market demand. It's partly because of spectrum, the radio waves not being released in the same time frame, and partly because 4G is actually well deployed across Europe and actually meets most customers' needs. But it should rise to about 82% in Europe by 2030. China's really interesting because that's the biggest market in the world. They talk about Greater China to try and include clearly Hong Kong and Taiwan. But in terms of Greater China, it's the biggest mobile market in the world, with in total over 1 billion customers using mobile in China. India is also over 1 billion, slightly behind today. China may well overtake China in terms of customer numbers by the end of this year. So it's expected this year India will become number one by customer number compared to China, which has traditionally been number one because of size. I should also highlight that income levels and spend levels are quite different around the world. And this may relate to competition and regulation. So in places like USA, the typical pricing is 3 times the rate we see roughly here in Europe. So there is an incentive to invest more because they get better paid for it in somewhere like USA. In Asia Pacific, they're down more at the European levels. So generally, pricing has to be taken into account as well. But you can see that some of these other areas are lagging. You know, it's only expected that Africa today is down there in the 24, but rising to 21% by 2030. So there are some significant geographical differences where these gaps need to be filled, both coverage gaps, usage gaps, and also technology adoption gaps. We're heading towards 57% globally by 2030. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? No? It's an important backdrop if you're interested in cybersecurity for mobile. If we look at where the growth is, this splits the high-income countries and the low-income countries against the world position. The world position's in yellow there. High-income countries are in red. Lower middle-income countries are in black. Generally, we can see faster rates of growth in the lower middle-income countries. It's not because we don't want to grow here in Europe. Actually, usage is growing in Europe, but subscribers are not growing at the same rate in Europe compared to places like Africa or other low middle-income countries. But if we look at how it contributes to society, the mobile bit is only mobile operator is only a tiny bit. We need to look at the network infrastructure. We need to look at the content and services and some of the applications. We can look at some of the indirect value-added areas. So what might that be? That might be people adding some value through connected cars or connected healthcare or new services in society that go beyond the network and the basic apps as we know. There's a lot more upside in that indirect area. One of the other areas the economists are really keen on is productivity. So if you are connected with other people, you can actually improve collaborative working. You can improve ways of making your production more efficient in the manufacturing environment or other sectors. but the productivity is a big boom. Just imagine having a relationship with members of your family and you're away from home and that they're living at home. How do you stay in touch? Mobile communications is the more normal way of staying in touch. So there is a benefit to productivity in our personal lives as well as in our work. But the overall total, roughly 6.4% of GDP on a global basis, 7.55 trillion. Huge sort of numbers. So that's the context to mobile. But as we do more and more with our mobile, it's not just consuming apps, it's these other sectors that are opening up. So what would a connected hospital look like in the future? It has to be secure to make it useful. Nobody wants to access data records, patient records that shouldn't have access to them. But you might want clinicians to collaborate. So there is an amazing hospital in Singapore that's designed as a connected hospital where every clinician on the island of Singapore can have access to the electronic patient records and collaborate with other clinicians. It's in a private network environment, more secure than the public network. It's got dedicated subscriber identity modules, so they know who is speaking to who when, but it means that people can collaborate over patient records and advice to the patient. It also allows the ambulances that are delivering patients to a hospital to pre-confirm information about the patient to the hospital before they arrive at the hospital in the ambulance, to make sure that the ambulance is not just connected, but also better prepared to receive emergency cases. It also allows for patient to family communications to work in a quiet and private sort of way. That helps the release of patients from the hospital in a more efficient way. So sometimes productivity can touch different sort of areas, like a connected hospital, particularly if you design it with security and privacy in mind. There are other examples in universities where we're going to see more AI and connectivity in universities, which also need that blend of cybersecurity and privacy to be designed in. So if we look at the last, this period, 2025 through to 2030, we can still see more growth, 6.4% of GDP rising to 8.4% global GDP. I mean, these are huge numbers when we think about the global scale of this industry, not just in terms of customer numbers, but in terms of impact on the global economies. So protecting it with cybersecurity and avoiding cyber attacks is quite important. This splits down some of the growth expected between 2025 and 2030 into sectors. And you might be quite surprised to see agriculture in there. Why not? Why can't you make farmers more productive, particularly when they're in remote locations, particularly when they want to understand the crops that they're dealing with, particularly when they want to understand whether the markets will take their crops. The crops could be animals, it needn't be wheat, it needn't be cereals, it could be all sorts of agriculture. Similarly, in ICT, we can see some productivity improvement there in terms of better usage of mobile communications. Financial services have rocketed in the last 10 years. Your ability to buy and sell things, particularly with a mobile, it's not available everywhere yet, but it's certainly increasing the utility of your banking system. Mobile money transfer is mainly used in places like East Africa and Southern Asia. That's already a multi-billion-pound market just to transfer money through mobile. You are sending money to your parents. They may be in a different part of Kenya. They may want to be able to buy things or pay for standing orders with things. That's all part of the finance growth that we're expecting to see. It's already a big market in Africa, parts of Asia. Public administration or government, they need to be more efficient. They need to be more mobile. Mobile means that they can actually locate government roles in different parts of the country more easily. If there are coverage gaps, there are other technologies that are now available, as we know, not just Wi-Fi and cellular as complements, but also satellite and cellular as complements. And I'll say a bit more about satellite later. We can see construction and real estate, traditionally really strong markets for the mobile sector. Lots of builders get their next job through their mobile phone. Real estate, equally, estate agents all rely on mobile phones, whether it's for mapping, whether it's for meeting new clients, whether it's for staying in touch. It's a major market. Manufacturing is seen as a particularly big one. Services, perhaps the biggest, more and more services. So if we can see that spread of sectors causing the growth, how are they being addressed? We can also see AI being adopted much more widely. So it's no longer a mobile phone for hearing, speaking, or transferring data. It's how can AI processing perhaps beyond the mobile smartphone itself. So we're seeing limited functionality AI inside smartphones already today. Some of you may not realize, but the mobile camera phone was 25 years old last year. Just imagine, who thought of putting a camera inside a mobile phone? Just imagine what a world was like before social media existed. Mobile camera phones have probably helped to invent social media. Others will claim some credit, but the camera phone has had a big hand in inventing social media. But just imagine what the world would be like without a selfie stick. Just imagine what the world would be like if you couldn't share your video messages with friends and family. It's gone from being black and white, small photographs, to bigger photographs, to color photographs, from still to video. There's been huge innovation in that space. But I give that as an illustration because I think AI is going to be an equivalent revolution, not in the next 25 years, but in the next 3 to 5 years, both in the device, but also in the network. So the mobile operators are already using AI and machine learning before that, particularly in areas like customer care. So this is like a snapshot of where the GSM associations see the main use of AI for the next 2 years. Customer care. Why would they use AI in customer care? Well, it might suggest that when you ring up the customer care, that they use voice AI. And they might use voice AI to make sure you get through to the right person with the right language. Not LLMs now, the right language that you speak and want to speak. It might also help to get through to the right service agent or customer agent, who may be a specialist in tariffs or in terminals, devices, or coverage, the subjects you're ringing up about. It could be any of those. You may want a service agent that can tell you that your bill needs correcting and you need to get through. So detecting the voice in customer care helps to make customer care more efficient. It's not just chatbots that some of us hate. It's much more than that. So AI is already used in customer care. It's certainly coming into networks, and we can see that in terms of network design. How can we use the huge data sets that are in networks today to actually use that data to make sure and improve the networks themselves from a quality point of view, the prevention of incidents, looking at the maintenance records, maybe making sure the software releases are kept up to date, maybe making sure the patching of the software is properly dealt with. AI pen testing is part of what the networks have to do. So the AI tools come in this area, affecting design and operations as well as maintenance. Design, operations, and maintenance. In terms of sales and marketing, it's certainly helping to identify new customer groups. So there may be some customers that are underserved. It's certainly helping with distribution analysis, sales channel analysis, if you like. I know less about that, but that's a major area. Corporate functions, AI-based accounting, AI-based legal processes, AI-based corporate functions that exist in the mobile world. Data centers, well, we won't have AI unless we have data centers because the amount of data being processed is so huge. We need to look at AI and data centers together. If the energy is not addressed properly, like energy costs or energy resilience, we'll have a problem in that area. So it might be a small percentage of the AI activity, but in terms of its significance to the future of AI and the future of data centers, it's a key area. There's some miscellaneous areas which may touch on some of the billing improvements that could be there, some of the other areas which help with the partners, the ecosystem partners. But that's a kind of quick snapshot of where AI is kind of going into as a percentage of current deployments. Now, I would expect that and that to grow within the percentage mix as we go forward through to 2030. That's from a snapshot of where we are today in 2026. And a quick stat, Mobile World Congress is held every year in Barcelona at the beginning of March. 2,900 stands that I saw when I was down there. And over 70% of the stands and an AI capability on the stands. So if you're interested in AI and or cybersecurity, that's clearly a place to look, because you can see the companies that are looking at AI and cybersecurity products, and they're looking to offer those solutions clearly to operators and other people in the ecosystem. We take some other emerging trends in devices, because often we think about the mobile industry from a devices point of view. You can see AI devices, so things like AI running on the device, getting access to cloud models, getting access to information that then pull down, but enabling real-time and personalized experiences. That's the first step, probably, of the smartphone industry to actually embrace AI. Clearly, there are some kind of suggestions that smartphones can then make based on that AI analysis, but frankly, in the device, you've generally got limited data sets. So I'm going to see more impactful activities of AI in the network rather than the device. However, we can see a lot of silicon and chipset innovation, which is actually helping to get the devices ready for an AI world. Certainly some more active chipsets, NPUs, AI accelerators to help Gen AI run more efficiently. We're certainly seeing a lot more safety and security coming into both mobile devices and into networks because of the amount of fraud and the growing number of cyber attacks. So things like scam detection, biometrics, fraud prevention, as well as some personal safety tools. There is an appetite, particularly in Western Europe, to look at some of the fraud that's going on the internet and starting to have devices that can detect fraud that way. There's a lot of interest in Ofcom right now. They've been holding recent seminars with the mobile operators to say, what else can we do to get scams off the internet? What else can we do to block access to those? That, to me, would be in the safety and security category, in a real world sense. Privacy by design, that's the kind of mantra. So how do we design in privacy as well as security by design? How do we build it in from the beginning so that these scams can't emerge? What can we do to design it in upfront? The SIM card is the subscriber identity module that's inside the phone. That's the identifier that's associated with you as an individual, you as a subscriber. An eSIM is an electronic SIM. It's a programmable subscriber identity module. So this is now becoming more and more standard, particularly in the high-end devices. It allows for different people to distribute smartphones either online or through other shop-type mechanisms. But it also means that the provisioning can be separated from the network. This is an area of risk because it brings in perhaps new cyber attacks. So there are some people looking at the provisioning side as a new cyber security risk. Certainly the international SIMs, which give you access to more than one network, also are a risk in this area. So imagine if you're in a car and you are pre-fitted with an eSIM or an international SIM in your car. How do you make sure that you can access the right networks and pay for it in the right way? How do you make sure nobody can attack the car as well as you while you're driving it? How do you stay safe in the car? Or imagine if you've got, in health terms, a wearable. How do you make sure if it's got an eSIM or international SIM inside it, that nobody can hack into that wearable while you're using it? I'm not trying to scare people who have wearable watches. There are other wearables that are coming along that need this sort of secure protection. So whether it's the car or the wearable arena, there is a lot more attention now taking place into how do we make the more ruggedized eSIMs and iSIMs. And in electronic engineering, there's some specialists in that area in UCL doing some testing in this area, quite simply because it's of concern and of real interest to make sure we design out the risks in this sort of area. Cross-device ecosystems, clearly, when we link access to Wi-Fi and to cellular, what's the cross-access arrangement? How do you make sure the attack doesn't come from the Wi-Fi side to attack the cellular side or vice versa? So this is more the cross-device where you've got more than one mode in your handset. Most smartphones today access Wi-Fi, also have a Bluetooth capability to access headsets or other music devices, but also the cellular mode is not the end of it, particularly if we add in satellite modes to it. So I used to work at O2, now called VMO2. They launched their service with Starlink a month ago. That's a bolt-on service where any O2 subscriber in the UK can access Starlink if they've got the right device. But they've had to do some cross-device security checks to make sure that from the satellite mode, it's not going to disrupt the broader cellular service in the process. The main benefit of getting access to both cellular and satellite is you get better coverage. You get to access the cellular map from O2 as well as the satellite map from Starlink. We are going to see more satellite options emerging because they are all being launched this year and next year. They're all being launched. We're expected to go from close on 10,000 satellites today to 100,000 satellites globally by 2030. That is a real hockey stick of growth, but it's why the cross-device ecosystems have to be thought about from a Wi-Fi, cellular, and satellite point of view. I also do some work with HAPS, high-altitude platforms. If we think about the different orbits for satellites, they tend to talk about GEO, geostationary, MEO, LEO. LEO are the main satellite ones, but below that, HAPS, high-altitude platforms, are like flying planes that can communicate to the ground. They can also communicate up to satellites, but they're a bit like flying planes or balloons that can work down as well as up. Drones are below those, and I wasn't really going to cover drones today, but that range, that vertical communications axis is a real reason why cross-device attention is needed. Now, clearly, as we work with AI hubs that may link phones, wearables, PCs, phones, and vehicles, that may be in the home or on the road, but we need to think about the vertical axis as well for cross-device ecosystems. This is a split of the sort of technology expected in the next 5 years. How will money be spent? It may not surprise you that the biggest stack there is AI technology, Gen AI and wider AI. It might surprise you that cybersecurity technology is only 10%. This is a global picture, and these are aggregate figures across all countries and vertical sectors surveyed. We can see a shift in 5G towards private networks. Why? Because some factories are saying they want their own dedicated 5G network that may access more than one capability or spectrum. So take a stadium, a football stadium. Let's take Arsenal, who seem to be top of the league, right? The Arsenal stadium cannot be served by one operator alone. But the Arsenal stadium actually doesn't get occupied every day of the week. So they are looking at how can they introduce a private network to the Arsenal stadium that can serve all the crowds that all want to see the activity there. Then you start to say, well, which of the other stadia are better covered? All of the Premier League probably within 5 years will have a private network of some sort, which we might call a neutral host that accesses all three mobile operators, BTE, VMO2, and Vodafone 3. So a neutral host would combine the radio capability to give more capacity to all the spectators who want to do more. What would they do? Well, they might be messaging their mates, male or female. What would they do? They might be sharing pictures of the goal they've just seen. What would they do? They might be telling their family, I'm going to be home late because we're celebrating. What would they do? There are lots of things they may do, which is not to distract from the match itself, but maybe to share the experience. It's also important when you look at a location to think about the commerce there, the shops, the things they can buy and sell, the ticketing. We took Glastonbury as another example. You might say, what should be done at Glastonbury? Now, for years, the mobile operators have put in things called cells, cows on wheels, cells on wheels, cows. And it's more likely that we see both neutral host or private network solutions for those sort of venues because they're not used all year round, but also they're not used all week, as in the stadium example. Cricket pitches, hockey matches, the bigger events, why don't they have better coverage? Now, Twickenham, Wembley, they've actually optimized those locations already, but I would suggest to you that there's a lot more activity happening in the private network space. Connected hospitals might be another example. Certainly in Singapore, that's a private network that is dedicated with secure communications in mind. IoT and big data, that's connecting things now. So these numbers, the 8.8 billion, exclude all connected things. So if you have a special subscription to connect to a smart meter or a special subscription to connect to a smart watch, that may well be in the IoT big data area. Why might you connect things? You might be able to manage those things a bit more efficiently. You might be able to manage your broader wellness with connected watches. You might be able to do some big data analytics capability to prevent certain conditions. Some watches measure blood pressure, for example. Patterns of blood pressure may not be big data analytics, but it's certainly important to you as an individual. Temperature monitoring is quite useful, and that's done in some buildings now to monitor temperature change. And it's in the news this morning that we're likely to have a few 40-degree days in the UK this year. How do we start to think about monitoring buildings more effectively and in real time? And that tends to get into the Internet of Things area. Cloud technology certainly being invested in, both public cloud and private cloud and on-prem and that sort of area. Could touch on that a bit more. Cybersecurity, so it's on the list. Connectivity beyond mobile, including the fixed Wi-Fi and satellite combination, virtual really. Other mobile connectivity. So we're doing some planning for the next generation of mobile from 2030 onwards. It might be called 6G. It might be called something else. This industry doesn't stand still because we have more and more usage, more and more traffic on the networks that needs more and more capability. And other technologies are sort of listed there as 13%. So that's a snapshot of where we see growth and expenditure. I thought I'd come back to the usage gap because you see Africa's got a big problem. Some of the devices and networks don't reach people in Africa. There are parts of Africa that have vast rural gaps in terms of coverage. But actually the usage gap beyond the coverage gap is an issue. How do you make sure it's priced effectively, people in Africa? How do you make sure it's easy to use in languages? During COVID, more and more schools were connected so that they had access to online information and educational materials. But actually, there's still a long way to go to get people connected and using the networks that exist, never mind the new ones to be built. If we look at Middle East and North Africa, there are similar gaps in North Africa, less to do with the Arab states, but Middle East and North Africa. And then some other gaps here. So you can see that not only is the pricing different around the world, but also the usage gap varies by country. And some of the investments going on to fill the coverage gap will help bridge the usage gap over time. Now, these are just some other sources if you need it for, particularly staying one step ahead with telco security. There's a link here. This is all on the GSM Association website. Just simply download that report. There's also a very helpful telco AI report, which was published earlier this year. I would take those references I find most useful. I was chairman in 1995-96 of the GSM Association. They run Mobile World Congress, so I keep an eye on what they produce. But it's just a great source. It's if you need the website, it's www.gsma.com. www.gsma.com. Now, I was going to say less about mobile and a bit more about what UK Telecoms Labs does today. But any questions on that bit? So I'll keep going, please.
Just sort of conception, how do you differentiate between like mobile network and all the graphics that are purely to do with mobile consumerism versus like all the IoT devices or like computer devices? So just like mentioning staying in touch with your family, like I kind of do that on my phone and then move on to my laptop and like that. How do you work together with telecoms or?
So in telecoms, we typically would say all devices be connected, computing devices anyway.
Yeah.
If you're in the home and you're using a fixed line, fiber, for example, and we just say it's a home device and we treat that as a wireline business rather than a wireless business.
And those would make like in your graphics.
They're on top.
Okay.
So just like the 8.8 billion excludes IoT, things that are connected with cellular or satellite, they're on top. The wireline are all on top as well. So the broadband service you get at home may well be fiber based, and you may have Wi-Fi tails. I'm excluding that from these numbers.
Okay, that makes sense.
And unfortunately, some of the Wi-Fi capability hasn't got the same strong security roadmap that cellular has got. because we come from that mobile industry background, we've had to think about identity management differently. We've had to think about attack vectors, service attack vectors differently. So I think you'll find that we've done a lot more. In the business area, they still have a lot of fixed communications or wireline communications. Generally, that's not covered in these slides. Certainly, I've had some discussions with the City of London and the Stock Exchange, and they have to have super high levels of resilience, but mainly for a fixed line or wireline with private circuits, different switching protocols, and so on. So, yeah.
So clearly, I saw your point that Europe has adopted 4G, is running people's applications perfectly well, and so therefore there wasn't a need in terms of growth to adopt 5G quite as quickly. There's been so much for sure, at least I would detect something. This is what I want to ask from my speculation to your knowledge. So one of the things on self-driving cars 5 years ago or something was to say we need 6G everywhere to facilitate the infrastructure for these self-driving cars. It seems to me that that's changed quite a lot, and that now the intelligence has been built into the car rather than a high rate of communication. So how do you see the need for 6G for those type of applications?
We can connect every car in Europe by 2030, should we wish. Cannot provide full autonomy for self-driving by 2030 with that, because the connectivity is a form of control. How can you offer both emergency relief, safety? How can you offer more benefits to the driver and the passengers with connectivity of 5G? So I don't see 6G coming soon, nor do I see it being necessary. I think the car industry, if they want to offer more driverless cars, fully driverless, have not asked for anything more than 5G either. That's because the cameras they're already putting in to help with move towards more driverlessness is being handled in a different way. So they talk about a software-defined vehicle, SDV, and the software-defined vehicle is much more self-contained for safety and security reasons than you might imagine. So the demand for anything higher than 5G is very low at the moment from the car industry. I was with some people from the car industry yesterday, and they want to talk about more vigorous long-term roadmap. But already there are things in the car called eCall. So every modern car in Europe is sold with connectivity, so that if your car crashes, it will alert the emergency breakdown people to rescue you. So every modern car for the last 8 years, I think it is now, they are now looking at next generation eCall that moves to a higher generation than 2G. They know that 2G is going to switch off in 5-7 years. So they need to be in a position where new cars coming off the factory line in 3 years' time have something higher than 2G, but it won't be anything higher than 5G. It's more likely to be 5G for a number of years. So the growth in 5G will support growing demands from the car industry, but they've not been asking for 6G at all. Some of the Chinese cars coming in from China now are taking increased market share. And it's interesting how they pre-fit more advanced connectivity to some of their cars. I'm old enough to remember when the Japanese started to bring in cars with pre-fitted car radios for entertainment systems. The world I grew up in was you had to buy your car radio and go to the dealer and get him to fit it. But the Chinese car companies now coming into Europe are pre-fitting connectivity ways that needs to be better tested, but is showing innovation in the connectivity arena, the likes of which we've not seen before. Shall I go on to UK telecoms now? Is it okay? So these are the sort of missions we have. We are co-funded by DCIT and NCSC. DCIT, Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, NCSC, National Cybersecurity Centre. Our purpose is primarily to test the mobile networks today for end-to-end resilience and cybersecurity. That's our purpose. And it's broken down a little bit because it's felt that it's protecting the UK economy. If we believe and know we're all in a digital economy today, the networks are the nervous system of the economy. So if the nerves are damaged, you've got a problem. So how do we make sure that there is an independent check, the cybersecurity and the software of networks end to end? So on the advisory board that I chair, we've got representation from Ofcom, we've got representation from DCIT and NCSC to guide that work. But we're doing real testing of software releases from the major vendors in the mobile network environment. Shall I stop, Esther? No. So to protect the economy, it raises the bar on security and resilience. So it's got a monitoring process that's independent of the mobile operators, independent of the leading vendors, but we give feedback to the leading vendors and the operators themselves. So if we discover something like patch is not done, we tell the people responsible straight away. Clearly, the vendors may deal with more than one operator. It may be then communicated to more than one operator. The plan is to unlock more growth in secure connectivity. This is creating also new cybersecurity roles that actually can do this in a practical way, not an academic way, in a practical way, and may create some new businesses as spin-outs. We can also see it build some global influence, things like standards. A lot of the telecom standards are what the networks are built on. In somewhere like ETSI, the European Telecom Standards Institute. But if we can discover poor habits in software, if I can put it that way, if we can discover the need for better patching, and we can then influence the standards to make sure it's more preventative, then that will help. That may also lead towards the better sharing of tools, cybersecurity tools. And if we can then have common measurement practices for the quality of the software, that would also help. So we can see it developing the next generation of telecoms and cybersecurity professionals. We can see it helping develop a whole new cadre of people who think about resilience in a different way. The industry has grown up heavily hardware oriented. The language of base stations conveys that. But generally, the software proportion that's now being used in networks is so heavy now, it needs its own focus to make sure the software is examined as part of the system. We can also see it driving impact on industry, smarter government action. Already there's been some announcements. You mentioned 6G, sir. There was an announcement in March about having security principles that would apply to the next generation of mobile standards as well. So that's what it does. It underpins that. Now I'm going to surprise you here with 2 QR codes. If you want to know more about it, I suggest you take a picture of that. We've even got a careers webinar on the 27th of May. And if you're interested, have a look, join the webinar. If you want to join the webinar, it'll say a bit more. Once you've taken a picture of that, I'm just going to show you where the jobs are on the last slide, if I may. Come back to that if you like. So these are just some current vacancies. So I chair the advisory board. I'm not the CEO. I'm not the interviewer. But I'm saying to you that these are current vacancies that we have. It doesn't all require prior knowledge in telecoms, because some of it is research. Some of it's checking for vulnerabilities and analysing the data we've got. Some of it's looking at some special testing that's necessary, whether it's on the security level or risk of fraud, it's minimising those risks. So it's looking at the standards. What sort of standardisation can we take from this? In other words, lessons learned, can we feed back into the standards body to help with that prevention message? Some of it's going to be involving operators as well as vendors, might be researching with them, doing some more intensive analysis. Senior software engineers. Again, there's another QR code there that would give you more details if you're interested. Any questions on UKTL? Go on.
Thanks so much. I was wondering, you mentioned earlier in the presentation around AI pen testing.
Yeah.
And I was wondering in UKTL, are you thinking about that? And are you also looking at the use of AI assessing patches?
So we are already pen testing. We are looking at the better AI tools that exist. Some of the AI tools that have been designed so far are very much based on the web itself. as opposed to telecoms networks. So they're not always in the language of telecoms and so adaptable to the language of telecoms. However, we have people already looking at which AI tools are most useful in a cybersecurity testing environment. We are also already discussing between the UK and Germany whether the approach the UK has got to that is comparable to the German approach. I don't think it's any secret, but there is more Chinese equipment in the German mobile networks than there is in the UK. So we would expect to learn from UK-German discussions whether we're on a similar pathway with AI or whether we're finding different vulnerabilities or not, whether we can share knowledge. That course of action is underway. And with India, we've also had some discussions under the UK-India FNI discussion, but directly with one of the big operators in India, Reliance Jio, to see whether they need some help with some of the security needs in the Indian network. So we have started the AI journey. We're not at the end of it by far, but some of these recruits will be involved with that work. Cybersecurity using AI is a natural course. It's a natural course that needs to be taken, but we've got to have people on it in the right sequence. Discovery first, what tools are available. Secondly, do the tools all work? Thirdly, can we benchmark with other countries to make sure we're not on our own in this area? Does that answer your question? Thank you. Any other questions on UKTL? Again, open date coming up if you want more. Happy to take questions later. So this final set of slides is just a little bit on UK-India. And this, as I say, was driven partly by a desire to collaborate between the UK and India, technically and through research. Steve Hales is on the advisory board. You'll see his name there. Some of the other names there have been brought in because of the knowledge they bring to help address this. So you can see they are well-established universities and leads in their own area, but working with leading academics in India. And the hope is that by comparison, we might support some areas of investment exchange, knowledge exchange. We might also support some ideas exchange. If it leads towards inward investment in the UK, tick. If it leads towards new suppliers in the UK, tick. If it leads towards new ideas that help to offer more services to customers, tick. India is a very different market and a very different country to the UK, but they have some high capability. I've even heard ministers say, we are the software capital of the world. Now, you may wish to disagree with that, but I've heard it said, and when a minister says we are the software capital of the world, I think there has to be some truth in that. And when you look to see American companies, a lot of them are run by senior Indians, strong academic background, a lot of Silicon Valley illustrates that. So they have a lot of credibility in the software space. So working together between UK and India is good, and UCL's involved with this through Steve and indeed other people maybe in the future. This is the advisory board. This is me, and there's a few others. Got Luke Ibbotson from Vodafone, a few other names both in the UK and India you may recognise, but that's the international advisory board. So what are the benefits? I'm sorry this colour is a bit odd. I hope you just go through this. So it's for promote research and innovation collaboration on future comms. It's not about 4G, it's 5G and beyond. It's sharing strategic challenges in the terrestrial and non-terrestrial areas. So it's including SATCOMs, it's not just mobile comms. It's looking at insights that we can share from our different markets or deployment conditions. We should recognize that of the 1.1 billion customers in mobile, they are shared across 3.25 operators for the whole of India, whereas the UK has close to 100 million customers, which are shared across 3 operators in the UK. So the size, it's a tenfold difference at least, but there's much more market consolidation to support the 400 million or the 500 million customers that Reliance Jio, Bharti Airtel, and Vodafone Idea have got. The links between the UK and India have traditionally been quite weak in telecoms. This is a way of strength. Ensure different telecom regimes can be adapted. In other words, the regulation is done differently. They don't have an Ofcom direct equivalent. It's done differently over there. They think about pro-investment regulation, pro-growth regulation, whereas Ofcom talks about pro-competition regulation. they talk about market share. They're different philosophies in terms of regulation. But when it comes to resilience, they both feel the same way. We need more coverage. We need more secure networks. We need to reduce scams. We need to make sure our networks are fit for the 21st century. And that leads towards things like scalable test beds and experiments. That leads towards mobility of people exchanges, if you like, early career research, PhDs. That leads towards some insights that can be shared. We've already had meetings in the UK with the leading Indian IT companies, so Tech Mahindra, Tata, Wipro, Infosys, HCL, leading companies that have been to this university, but also other universities, but also invest in the UK today. So that's not a direct outcome of this, but it's an impact. The industrial insights are important because you need to understand use cases and where are the differences. Building up some common understanding to influence the future tech standards, including 6G and future networks. Support UK and Indian pilot projects. That's a nice list. Again, you can see that all the slides use it at your leisure. This is an overview, and it kind of plots some of the work. So architecture, we've got a joint link in the UK and Bangalore, with Surrey and Bangalore together on an Open RAN, Open Radio Access Network testbed. Pilot projects supporting visiting researchers, and then these are some topics down here, technical challenges. I could say that cybersecurity doesn't jump off the page, but some work has been done in that area. There's research and innovation. We do a few dots. Security resilience of interfaces and components. That's pretty close to cybersecurity. Promoting telecom skills pipeline. That will need cybersecurity. Impact on business models. Some of the fraud in India is dreadful at the moment. They need to do something about their fraud activities. That's why they're talking to UK Telecoms Labs as well as UK NI. Systems integration with legacy networks. When do you switch off the older networks? When do you integrate them better? How do you reduce the attack surface? Again, that's a snapshot. Read at your leisure. There's some more materials here available as well on the website. So, roadmap report on future telecoms network systems, executive summary, intro, international groups and organizations, global standards, 5G, beyond 5G, open RAN landscape in Europe, 5G, 6G, open RAN landscape in USA, 5G, 6G, open RAN landscape in Canada, 5G, 6G, open RAN landscape in Japan. Some more landscape documents. Again, read at your leisure, more material on the website. And this is a meeting that took place October last year. I was at it, but I'm not on the panel. The Gerard Park from University of East Anglia, sitting with Managing Director of BT, Gabriella Stroman. She's Managing Director of Research and Commercialization. She runs all of Adastral Park up at Ipswich Way. And then Catherine Page, Deputy Director from DCIT, and some Indian representatives that are shown here. So, practical discussions in an open forum, transparency as well. And courses, 6 days residential faculty on cybersecurity. I don't know, Steve, you're involved with that, were you? So that's practice thing you preach, teaching. This is a faculty development program, perhaps later date, is it?
It's the same thing.
Same thing, just different style. And this was a test that was done in India recently. Were you there for this one, Steve?
I actually went out to the same village. This was done here a few weeks ago.
So this is testing telehealth over satellite. And just imagine some villages in India don't have hospitals. They don't even have GPs or doctors. They had a capability where a doctor at this end could help with analysis at the far end. But doing it over satellite makes you think about, is the communication resilient enough from the UK to India to this remote village? Can it be cost effective as a way of filling in some telehealth advice? I'm not recommending telesurgery now. This is just telehealth advice. But to prove it technically from a telecoms and a satcoms point of view is quite a breakthrough. But that's touching real villages, rural people who don't typically have access to full communications, full internet. They don't have that. This was a way of demonstrating that. So people would learn from it, and on the strength of this, they're looking at doing something similar in other villages in India to see if remote support can work for a village, not just in health, but in other areas. I'm also involved privately with some other work between Singapore and Ghana. That does include telesurgery. So some of the remote capabilities in telehealth and telesurgery are increasing all the time because we don't have enough doctors on the planet to treat people properly. We need to find ways of transferring knowledge and sharing that knowledge with people. So I think this has got a social and a cultural dimension to it, not just a technical dimension to it. But if you don't get the plumbing right, you can't start. This is an instance of the plumbing. Making sure it's not open to cyber attacks, though, is critical. So making sure cybersecurity is in the mix is vital. These were Gerard Parr's slides that I've taken for today. So if you need more on it, don't hesitate to email Gerard Parr or ask Steve for more details. Any questions on any of the slides I've shown today? In India?
Yeah, with the remote village and like
A little bit more.
I can send you a bit more as well.
Go on.
Okay, so I was there about a month ago. And that's a small village just outside of Nagpur, which is kind of slap bang in the centre of India. What they've done there is it's kind of a technology demonstrator. So they're trying to figure out what technologies are useful in what might be a smart village in India. So when you think about India, you kind of think about urban populations. But of the sort of 1.2 billion people in India, about 80% of them live in villages. And so it's actually predominantly rural population. Connectivity is partial in many of these places. Electricity supply goes on and off in many of these places. And so this is an attempt to figure out what ultimately is useful. So they've deployed out there, they've deployed field sensors to figure out nutrient levels in the fields, water levels, because it's 44 degrees C, you have to irrigate, and so knowing when to irrigate matters. They've got a drone to apply pesticides and things like that. They've got a cell tower that's been put up in the village. They've got a booth which is there to provide advice on all sorts of things and connectivity to the local markets where people sell their agricultural produce. They've got a smart board in the school there, which is kind of checked. It's only a tiny village school, but it's changed the nature of the education there. And as Mike said, they've got the health centre as well. That was specifically a project with ESA to look at satellite connectivity there. But it just in the normal course of things, they've got both fibre to the village and they've got mobile coverage in that specific village as well. And actually the telehealth will run over those too. They've got blood testing machine. It's all sorts of technology that in reality, how do you roll this out over 650,000 villages, right? That's a scale problem. You're likely to get, you might go and get some level of government investment, whether it's state level or national level, in terms of the hardware. It's a bit sort of capital expenditure, but you're still going to come up with a business model. And what Mike was hinting at earlier in terms of business models is that they're very different in India and Africa than they are here, because they have to be. People are poorer. So what that business model will be and what of that technology will survive being rolled out is kind of an open question at the moment.
I think it went very well, considering the remoteness of the village and the challenges they have locally. The challenges they have locally are enormous compared to the technology solutions being offered.
That's absolutely right. it demonstrates the potential of these technologies. Yeah. It's not, again, we'll see which of them really survive, but there is absolutely a place for technology, and it's not people kind of descending on the village. The villages were involved in this discussion. In fact, the people who are maintaining the technology have been trained out of the village, right, and the people from the village. So the potential is absolutely there. And without pilots like this, you can't know what's possible and what the benefits might be, and communicating that, amongst the politicians, right? Because politicians matter here, and also other villages. So politics, India's a democracy all the way down to the village level. So there is an elected head of the village, or head panchayat, and getting other heads of villages to understand what is possible is a piece of work, and this is one of the ways that you can kind of demonstrate that.
Pretty cool. I would really want to see how social adaptability like builds on around that. Maybe now in conflict zones you can make a doctor like super accessible to places where traditional infrastructure is no longer there, or is that what I'm doing with?
So I was going to just tell a story about Ukraine briefly, if I may. So the first people to connect Starlink to the mobile network were VEON in Ukraine. And they did that because they had huge problems in the war-torn Ukraine with a lack of reliable energy. In other words, the energy was going off, it was being bombed, the cell towers came down, they lost communication capability because the energy was being put out, so it's regular. They thought, well, what can we do about this? They then said, well, let's think laterally about it, and why don't we offer all our customers access to Starlink? VEON gave 20 million customers access to Starlink. They had to buy the right handset. They weren't all having the right handsets to start with. But they said it's available for all of you within your monthly bill. And that is adding resilience to the communications requirement for people of Ukraine, the whole of Ukraine. Totally different way of looking at things. If you look to see what they're doing in defense terms as well, some of the connectivity to drones and the video playback on drones is phenomenal. The eye in the sky is helping them defend their country. So if we look at it from another country's point of view, we can learn from that. I would say more broadly than Ukraine or India, the GSM Association aligns to all of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It's the only sector that I know that is tied up to all of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. And they report on them every year. They say this is the progress the mobile industry has made globally to each of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So you get lots of stories in that area that help you with your dissertation or your projects, or So have a look at the bit of GSMA that says UN Sustainable Development Goals. Health, I don't think is covered deeply enough, but frankly, health is in the mix. Equally, resilient infrastructure is in the mix. But there are stories in there that help to illustrate the need and what else still needs to be done. Sorry, I sidetracked from India there.
No, so within India, there's a lot of internal units in India. So, you're talking about war zones and those kinds of environments. Well, within India, population moves. At the moment, there's a major problem there because of the lack of LPG, which people use to cook on because of the conflicts with Iran. And so, large numbers of people are moving from urban centres back to villages. And so you've got large informal settlements and slums and things like that actually have a lot of the attributes of refugee camps and things like that as well. And so they're informal, they're mobile, they're changing all the time. And there is absolutely a desire, because we spoke to the mayor of Nagpur, and she wanted very much to pull that sort of technology into those environments. So, yeah, absolutely.
One of the other striking things with India, apart from scale, is the identity management approaches. So they delivered what I would call next generation identity management for the nation, because people didn't always have bank accounts, people didn't always have taxation returns, people didn't always have the money flows that would go with a more traditional society that we know in Western Europe. So they've introduced something called Aadhaar, which is identity management for everybody, which means that everybody gets access to health care at some point because they've got an identity that can show. It means they can produce identity management linked to birth certificates, which traditionally have not been done very well. It also means that beggars on the street can take cash from you because they've got an Aadhaar-based banking account. So beggars, street traders, they can take cash transfer from a mobile device there. It's remarkable when you see it. It's a more modern banking system, a more modern financial services system than you typically see in the West. It's more accessible and more inclusive. But if you're trying to change a society, you've got to look at identity management, you've got to look at transactions, you've got to look at the basic paperwork. Governments don't always do the right thing in the right order, but they're trying something different. That approach to Aadhaar and identity management is being adopted by many low and middle income countries because they realize it's the identity management system that's been holding them back in many cases. If you don't get access to banks or pharmacies or doctors, identity management has to be fixed in the mix. Does it mean there are new cybersecurity risks? Of course there are. But at the end of the day, they're trying to put in some rigor, try and make sure the basic services run, and then make sure the cybersecurity is applied on top if they haven't fixed it at the beginning. Any more questions? I've got one for you.
I'm genuinely interested in your response to this. We're talking about the evolution of 6G. We're also talking about environments where 5G is quite pushing it because the 5G equipment is significantly more expensive than 4G equipment. And so future networks for India look quite different to future networks for here. How do we deal with that disparity in practical deployments and aspiration over different timescales? And how do we engage in the standards process? How do we get people into the standards process who represent LMICs?
So first of all, international standards are vital to bring down the costs for everybody. International standards bring research together that can be shared across borders. So assuming we still want both, which I think we do, sharing research and lower costs, we need to maintain international standards. Can we make them more open to low and middle income countries? I think the question might be, what would they gain from it? I think being the recipient of international standards where they know their needs are being met might be a better middle ground than sending everybody to Etsy to discuss standards when they don't necessarily have the knowledge or the background, but their needs must still be met. But we need to also accept that if you're in a lower income country, you may not be able to afford all this new technology. And I'm afraid some of the attention in the research community has been much more on exciting innovation and not on reducing costs. One way of reducing cost is to combine generations of mobile more fully. So it's less likely that 6G is a new generation at all. It may well be an extension of 5G and interoperable with 5G, because that's the way of keeping the costs down. So I think the needs of every country need to be met, but it might be done through outcomes rather than influencing the standards themselves. Does that answer your question? I think so. I'd also say that there's plenty of room for manufacturers to innovate around the existing standards. When Apple launched the iPhone in 2007, it was a shocker, but now nearly most phones look the same. They're not all as expensive as the Apple iPhone range, but what they've done is they've opened up new markets because it's a smartphone, not just a basic phone. It's giving better access to Wi-Fi and to the internet, and it's giving access to many more services. It's opened up new markets. I would expect new people to bring in the India phone, which might bring in some of the villages into that community more fully. And also expect some more Chinese phones to innovate in that area. If you look at the top 10 smartphone vendors, the top 2 are certainly Samsung and Apple, but the next 8 are all Chinese. There's no reason why India can't climb up into the top 10. No reason why we shouldn't see more of the Chinese phones here in Europe or North America. Innovation will continue. So it's not just standards based alone, it's where the innovation comes from.
That's a good question. So clearly all this functionality is growing within the mobile device, and the criticality because of that becomes more and more apparent. So just a question, I'm sure it comes down to, I'm not sure, I guess it comes down to the economy and the costs of these things. I'm a bit surprised that the theft of phones is not a aspect of security which is more directly dealt with. So registering the IMEI, blocking it, having that done on an international basis, so that it really takes away the driving force to steal phones. What's your views as to why that doesn't appear to be done, or is it done but I'm just not aware of it?
I'm going to give you a personal view on this, which is not so much a republication, but a personal view. I don't think the police and justice authorities in the UK understand the capability of the mobile networks and the way in which they can see a mobile phone when it goes from one location to another. In other words, the mobile networks today know where all the phones are on their network. They know by time of day and by location, with quite high precision. They also know who you call. We can't pass on that information because of data privacy and data protection. When there's theft, you usually spot it. I was involved when something called the Sower murder took place. We were able to identify when Ian Huntley had used the phone when supposedly he had nothing to do with the girls, but he was using the girls' phone stupidly when they disappeared. So we had to check who was holding and using the phone and give the information to the police. That was clearly criminal. We haven't done as much since then to actually help the police in that sort of area. And I think it's because I'm afraid the police justice system is not keeping up with the capability of the mobile networks. There is plenty of room, I'm saying off the record, for a better dialogue between the police and the mobile operators to solve some of the thefts that are going on. It is irritating for the mobile operators not to have had that dialogue done before. In other countries, and it might be more in the big brother countries, if you like, there is a lot more police intervention in this area. And I think there is a case with your theft example and the scale of it to have better dialogue with the police systems. The systems exist in O2. I can't imagine they don't exist in Vodafone 3 or in BTE to help the police now. Where there's a will, there's a way.
Classic question. Last year it was said that cybercrime was worth the equivalent to the third largest economy in the world. It's about $10 trillion. If you look at what you've described about mobile, its expansion, its interconnectivity in the different ways and ways we use it, are we really going fast enough? Is the next COVID, the next pandemic, really a cyber issue to do with the mobile world?
I think we're going fast enough. I'm not sure everybody's keeping up. So I think the operators, the vendors are aware of the risks, and that's why they're minimizing the risk where they can. But I'm not sure the sharing of the solution is wide enough within UK society, and I think it needs some fresh approaches. having set up UK Telecoms Lab, I've been surprised what government didn't know and what they did know. We are doing the right thing, we're going in the right direction, but I'm not sure some of the measures arising from the work we're doing in UKTL are being absorbed quickly enough.
By individuals or companies or
Both.
both?
The ones I'd worry about most would be, I think, the arms of government that should know more. And we certainly have found examples where they want to know more. And that's why we're continuing. But I'm a bit worried about the engagement pace as opposed to the pace of work we're doing in UKTL. We are constrained in UKTL by the recruitment issues. Can we get the right people we can trust and have the right technical background? The reason I do talks like this is to try and encourage people to think about, would this be an area of interest? But generally, the pace needs to pick up on collaboration with the technical side of government and justice's system, I think. And I suspect, Steve, you've seen some of this with some of the work you've done as well. If I look to see also how the emergency services system has moved from PMR airwave system to cellular, it's moved at snail's pace, and I don't think they've taken on board the pace at which the mobile industry works and can change to meet their needs. You know, they're almost treating it as a program transition, but they're not treating it as an urgent issue to fix.
Thank you.
I was also wondering a bit more about how this vertical access of like satellite layer and all the intermediate layers, and how you see that evolving in the future, like having a dynamic, or if it'll really be focused on resilience, of a depth kind of reliability structure.
So it's changing rapidly at 10,000 satellites to 100,000 within 5 years. Geographically as well, not everybody is joined up on that thinking. So you go to somewhere like India, they think about satellites as if it's for the defense industry as opposed to consumers or businesses or government. So their attitude changes about how is a satellite sold. Drones, I think, have been reluctantly accepted, but are still being trialed. You know, just see incidents like drones around Gatwick and kids playing with them when they shouldn't really be playing with them near an airport. You know, there's some basic issues. Drones can do so much more. And if you take my example of 25 years of a camera phone, just imagine what the camera technology is doing inside drones today. It can see so much. So it could be seen as an invasion of personal privacy. It could be seen as a great surveying tool. There's an event at Excel called Geographic Business, if you like. It's all about what can the eyes of the sky see to help estate agents or surveying or transport management, all sorts of things like that. So we need to embrace the vertical axis. Is it being done evenly or no? I think innovation is continuing to flow. And there will be some chaos, as with most innovation, but at the end of the day, it'll settle down. And it'll settle down with mobile linkage to satellite or drones with standards, basically. So the work O2 had to do to get the Starlink subscription up and running in the UK has been huge. Lots of testing, lots of checking out terminals, which devices work up to the satellite Starlink constellation, which ones don't work, which ones can you promote, how do you explain geography? You know, the satellite boys haven't got very good coverage maps. They're nowhere near as advanced as Ofcom are with the Find Your Mobile coverage. That's an excellent service if you've not used it. But they don't have any thinking about what coverage maps need to be in the eyes of the customer. They tend to think about ships over the sea, and maybe airplanes that need connecting. They don't think about coverage maps. So I think standards are key, but also I think better exchange of knowledge between the different sectors called SATCOMs and telecoms. Better knowledge between apps and telecoms, drones and telecoms is needed. Frankly, if you don't have the connectivity, what are they there for? You know, they're there to provide more connectivity, more coverage, more capability. And that's what innovation brings. But it will bring in new cyber risks. The attack vector, from a cybersecurity point of view, is no longer terrestrial, it is terrestrial and vertical. Some of the satellite companies also built satellites in the past with proprietary standards to their own company only, and that's been a controlling business model. You can't continue that way. You know, if they're going to reduce costs, they're going to have to adopt international standards, which are much more open. So there's a driver on them. It's not just telecoms pulling them into something, it's they're being forced from the inside.
But on that topic, if the satellites are going to be so much in number and like the cost of sending stuff into space is that much lower, is there governance on what you do when a satellite stops working? Or like who has to collect all the space time that is there and how to increase the resilience of like space assets in general?
So some bits of the regulation are common. So Ofcom regulate the spectrum for mobile and for satellite. But most of the regulation about what services should be included for satellite are excluded from Ofcom's remit. So if you want to, for example, help the police with satellite services, Ofcom go nowhere near it. You know, it's a service development issue. So there are gaps in regulation, there are gaps in language, there are the security side is not well dealt with by most of the satellite players. You know, they don't think architecture the way the telecoms guys do. Security is a missing. It's a lopsided playing field relative to telecoms. They need to understand it and design it in because they're going to be stopped from offering certain services. Just imagine from an Indian point of view, if some satellites were launched by their neighbour in Pakistan and they went over India. What do you think the Indians would feel about that? You know, it's not just a border dispute, it's a satellite dispute. So it's also control over how can that eye in the sky work if it's trespassing on your country. International roaming, what do you do with that? You know, international roaming works in a mobile sense between licensed operators, different countries that they represent. But satellite is not really licensed for a country, it's licensed for a geography, which often is a continent, which may include many countries. You can see high demand for satellite comms in USA because the coverage gaps in the USA are huge. Satellite would help to fill the coverage gaps. But in a big country, it's fairly easy to say, I'm the SEC, I'm in charge of it from a regulatory point of view for both mobile and satellite. Not so easy when it comes to Europe with all our countries. So there's a few things to fix there. I don't want to be doom and gloomish about it, but I think the innovation will provide more services than you've ever imagined. But we need to fix some of the regulatory issues along the way. And security is a key one that needs more attention. So UKTL is looking at what else do we do beyond the mobile networks. We're already looking at should we do more work with eSIM because of some of the issues in that area, for IoT in particular. We're also looking at private networks and neutral hosts. We're also looking at SATCOMs. We will look possibly next year at public networks as well as private networks. But we don't want to duplicate what's already done well by the operators themselves. We just want to stay within the brief that I've got up on the slide. Any more questions?
In which case, can we then like these?
Good luck with the rest of your course. I'm expecting great results from all of you, including those online.
Thank you, Andy. That was a bit of a tour de force.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Well, I had the earlier slides anyway.
Yeah,
And I thought that's a useful backdrop to talk a bit about cybersecurity in a practical way. So,
absolutely.
yeah.
The fact that everything was getting linked together.
Yeah. Systems design with security in mind, service in mind as well. Yeah. So switch this off.
I remember the CEO of Telefonica at one of the World Congresses.